If you're a relatively new author with a relatively small mailing list, then I would suggest that the first thing that you want to do is upload a reader magnet. What a reader magnet is generally a 10 to 15,000 word short story prequel to your series. So when you are looking at whether or not to approve the reviewer and actually give a code to them, you can actually check out their reviewer profile to make sure, okay, do they actually read in my genre? Do they actually leave reviews? All that kind of stuff before you sort of just send a code out.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 122 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In this episode, I have an interview with Evan Gow from StoryOrigin. Now, Evan is the indie developer of StoryOrigin, which is a marketing tool and community of authors that work together to build their mailing lists, increase sales, find reviewers, and stay on top of deadlines. And there's a full suite of tools available for you at StoryOrigin, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I'm going to start with some comments from recent episodes. I have a comment from episode 121, Reinventing Yourself and Currency for Everyone with Sir John Hargrave. And Chad Boyer said, I listened to your Canadian library story thinking, man, Canadians got it good. And then the end where you couldn't buy the Bitcoin seems like, hey, Americans got it good. I think the real questions are why don't Americans get a library payout and why don't Canadians have the right to buy Bitcoin, especially since Bitcoin is supposed to be a truly free, as in access currency. Good point there, Chad. I don't think it was Bitcoin itself. I think it was the website that Sir John Hargrave had only allowed for American addresses. So as a Canadian, I wasn't actually able to complete the purchase. So I'll have to figure out a way around that. There always is a way around things, such as a friend in the States who lets me use their address to have the book shipped to. Chad also goes on to say, so I work in the software industry and I find the idea of blockchain daunting when I'm trying to figure out how to use it in everyday work. I enjoyed the interview with Sir John. He sounds like he understands the subject matter really well, and this book, like say Liar's Poker or Moneyball, take a complex subject and explain it through story and character. And yeah, that's what it sounds like it does. Now, I haven't actually read this book from John yet, but that's kind of like what even Malcolm Gladwell does. This takes a complex subject and talks about it in a way that the average person like you and I can understand. So that's kind of cool. And finally, Chad said, those two poems, and he's talking about the two poems I read in my reflection at the end. He said, those two poems are awesome. I heard about If a while back, and even attempted the Art of Manliness challenge to memorize it, but fell short. I've been researching a counterpart of it for my daughters because ending the last line as, you'll be a woman, my daughter, throws off the rhythm. I'm going to see about finding the Maya Angelou poem and getting them both on the wall at the house for everyone to reference. So glad you like those poems, Chad. Again, as I was reading the poems, I thought it was a little bit self-indulgent of me to want to share these things because they had meaning to me. But I'm so glad that they had meaning to you as well as to you and your daughters. And again, I recognize that the Kipling poem was written a long, long time ago. And even though the poem addresses man and mankind and sun and stuff like that, I think of it in terms of humankind and stuff like that. But yeah, the rhyming structure of the poem kind of falls flat if you switch it over to "You'll be a woman, my daughter." But good point. I'm glad you found those poems inspiring. Now, speaking of comments, I have a winner randomly selected from the comments on episode 118. And if you remember, that was an interview I did, or a conversation, I should say, that Matty Dalrymple and I had. We both co-authored the book, Taking the Short Tack, Creating Income and Connecting with Readers Using Short Fiction. And commenters had up until the end of day, February 29th, 2020, to leave a comment to be put in a random drawing for a print copy of the book. And Amy Tasukata is the lucky winner of a print copy of that book. Amy, I have reached out to you to confirm your address so I can have that drop shipped directly to you from Amazon. It won't be a signed copy because Maddie and I aren't in the same physical space, so getting the 2 signatures would be shipping this around a lot. So it's just coming straight to you from Amazon. So congratulations, Amy, and thank you so much for leaving a comment on episode 118. Always love the comments from folks. Now, there is a second copy of the book available, and this copy is available exclusively for patrons of the Stark Reflections podcast. And those are people who support this podcast for as little as $1 a month, $3 a month, or $5 a month over at patreon.com/starkreflections. And for the patronage, they don't not only get entered in chances to win prizes such as this every single time I have a prize available, but they also get access to additional audio content and video content and text content that I post on a semi-regular basis. Thank you guys so much for being patrons, for your patronage. That helps pay for my time in producing the show. And so all the patrons to this podcast were entered into a random drawing for that second print copy of the book. Now, the way it works is that the $1 per month patrons are entered in with 1 chance to win. The $3 a month patrons are entered in with 2 chances to win. And the $5 a month patrons are entered in with 3 chances to win. And the patron winner, drumroll please, is Chad Boyer. Chad, thanks for being a patron of the podcast. I have already confirmed your address with you because you were the lucky winner from a previous episode for commenting. So now you've won for commenting. And yes, I did read one of your comments in this episode, but you've won for your engagement and commenting, and you've won a book for being a patron of the show. So thank you so much for your patronage. Thanks everyone for your patronage. Thanks everyone for being a listener of the show. And thank you for taking the time to engage and comment on in the episode. I hope to have more prizes and more fun engagement in future episodes. That's it for the comments. Let's move on to a word from this episode's sponsor, Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is the author-friendly way for you to get your audiobooks out into the global market of retailers and libraries. 43 retail and library markets available for you as an author. Now, there's 2 different ways you can do this through Findaway Voices. If you already have the audio ready to go, you can just load your content up there and set your price. You'll be able to set your price everywhere except on Audible, where they actually control the price. And you'll be able to, because you can control the price, participate in discounts and promotions and things like that. And some of the discounts and promotions that we'll be talking about with Evan through StoryOrigin, where you can find reviewers for your audiobooks and a place to give out either your Audible codes or your Findaway Voices codes for free downloads of your books. But as well, through Findaway Voices, you can access a suite of narrators from around the world that are project managed. So if you have a book that you want to be made into an audiobook, you can get your book loaded up onto Findaway Voices, fill out some forms, and then you work with a project manager who will find 5 to 8, most likely, potential voices that would be suitable potentially for your book, and you can go through them and decide if they're worthwhile, and they kind of walk you through that whole process. There's different opportunities available where you can purchase the rights from the narrator and you own all the rights to the audiobook, so you can do whatever you want with it. Or you can sign up for the Voices Share program, which means you pay 50% of the narrator's going rate, but then you're splitting royalties with the narrator, where the narrator is going to get 20% of your cut for that book. Again, lots of options, lots of opportunities for you to explore audiobooks, and you can do that over at starkreflections.ca/findaway. And now for a brief personal update. I have recently, in terms of my writing, I've reworked some of my covers, several covers in my Nocturnal Screams short fiction series. This is a series that is at 7 volumes, and I do have to work on the 8th volume. It was when I started to begin working on the 8th volume that I realized I really should go back and redo the covers, give them a better treatment. So I've kind of done a little bit of that over the last month, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. I am also planning on working on print versions of those chapbook-sized story collections, because in print they can probably sell for about $5. And again, just be other opportunities for when I'm doing events in person later in the year. I am booked at Sudbury Graphicon in June, and I'm going to be at London Comic Con, London, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half drive from Waterloo, and that'll be in the spring or summer sometime. I've already prepaid for that, so... in terms of other writing, I have begun work on a story I'm writing for the Monsters in Love anthology, and that's part of the Amazing Monster Tales anthology series by Deanna Nipling and Jamie Ferguson. And I've started working on the Meet Cute story of Michael and Gail from A Canadian Werewolf in New York. And I'm really only about 3 or 4, maybe a page worth into that story. The deadline, I don't have to get it to them until the middle of April, but I started at the beginning of March because I really am trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure out, this is how Gail and Michael meet, and I don't want it just to be the meeting, but I want there to actually be a story. I want there to be some conflict. I want there to be some choices that they have to make. So I'm kind of discovery writing that. I just purchased Jay Thorne and Zach Bohannon's 3-story structure book, and I've listened to them talk about that on their podcasts. And so maybe I'll even look at that and applying that to the story. We'll see how that goes. Speaking of stories, Dean Wesley Smith has confirmed that he is going to be using a series of some reprinted shorts that I showed him, and I called this a menagerie of messed up shorts to use in his special edition of Pulp House magazine on the theme of messed up, because they're really messed up. It's a combination of micro short stories and twisted poetry, which I think he enjoyed, and I think would be a good addition to that special issue. Now, I have a couple of books in Kobo's mystery, thriller, and horror-themed buy one, get one free promotion, which is running for the entire month of March 2020. So what I have in there is I have Campus Chills, which is a horror anthology I edited and also published. And Nocturnal Screams Volumes 1 to 4 are in that. So that's basically those 4 mini chapbook volumes that basically make a short book. And so that's in there as a digital bundle. And I'd also submitted my buddy Sean Costello's books, Eden's Eyes, which is in the horror category, and Last Call, which is in the thriller category. And so it's just the beginning of the month. It's March 5th as I record this. So it's something that we'll see how this goes. It's just running throughout the entire month, so that's interesting. As I mentioned, it's March 5th, and I've spent a lot of the last 24 hours going back and canceling my trip for London, England. I was supposed to leave late Saturday night, and what I am going to be doing is I'm not actually going to be going on the trip now because as of yesterday morning, as of May 4th, the London Book Fair has been canceled, and so a bunch of my business meetings are now canceled. I'm just reworking those into calls anyways, and just to save extra money for Draft to Digital, it doesn't make sense to go. I'm able to reapply the plane flight to another trip, which is coming up later in the spring. So that's interesting. I had been planning on being in London, and then I'd be home for a few days before I go on vacation, an actual personal vacation where I won't be online for an entire week, which is going to be awesome, March break. But now I kind of get that time back, which means I can get more stuff done via Draft to Digital. I can get more stuff done via personal writing because I won't be at a conference doing all the conference things. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like that fallback time of year where you get the extra hour, or maybe the February 29th where you get an extra day. How are you going to invest that time? That's something that I put in the theme of my author newsletter that I sent out is obviously I procrastinated to wait till the 29th of February to send my February newsletter. And I thought, well, hey, I took advantage of that extra day to procrastinate one more day, but I also got extra writing done. So that's just some of the meandering things from my personal update. Why don't we get on to this interview with Evan from StoryOrigin. Evan, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks for having me on.
So before we get into talk about StoryOrigin, I want the origin of the guy who created StoryOrigin. I want the story origin of the guy who created StoryOrigin. Tell me who Evan is and what his writerly background is.
Yeah, so how I sort of ended up at StoryOrigin was I actually used to write short stories back in high school, and that's where sort of my passion for writing came from. And then I during senior year participated in this program called 3-Day Startup, which is where you sort of try to come up with the business plan and do something in the course of 3 days. And that really sparked my interest in pursuing entrepreneurship full time at some point. And so eventually I left my previous role, and I was looking at what to do next and wanted to combine those passions for both writing and then entrepreneurship, and decide to build StoryOrigin.
So wait a second, it was a high school program that actually inspired this, the entrepreneurial program?
The
Initially?
entrepreneurial program was actually during my senior year of college. It's called 3-Day Startup. So
Okay.
it actually started here in Austin, Texas, which is where I live. But they host these at different universities all of the world, and it's a nonprofit. And I actually maybe once or twice a year will actually go and volunteer and help run one of these nowadays.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're
Yeah.
there inspiring folks like yourself. That got okay, that's kind of cool. So how long so you had this passion for writing short fiction. You went in senior college, inspired with entrepreneurial startup, and then how long was the gestation period before the two of them kind of combined?
So I worked for 4 years after college, and it wasn't until about 3 years into my career where I was sort of like, okay, I really want to pursue entrepreneurship full time. Now's the time to do it. I'm gonna leave in about a year. Here's sort of the ideas that I've thought about, and then over the course of that year or so, I had various ideas, but I kept coming back to this one, and so that's sort of how things evolved.
Oh, okay, that is really fascinating. Because what I love is, as a person who was passionate about writing, that's kind of a spark for this. A lot of writers are looking at how can I write full time? How can I do that? So it's
Right.
a very similar transition, I imagine. So what was it that you saw that was a need for authors that StoryOrigin could fulfill?
Yeah, so I went and I talked to some self-published authors, and I sort of looked at what all they were doing, all the different things they were using, and I realized, okay, you're using something for doing newsletter swaps, you're using something for your reader magnets, you're using something for review copies, you're manually building pages on your website and doing these sorts of cross promotions and all of this kind of stuff. I was just realized how fragmented and how difficult it is to sort of wrangle all of this stuff as as an individual to stay on top of this all. And so I thought, okay, what I want to do is build the platform where you can do every kind of cross promotion that you would want to do, whether it's a newsletter swap, group promotion, whether that's for review copies or reader magnets or your universal book links or what have you.
Okay, cool. Well, I want to go back to newsletter swaps, and I want to ask this. It's going to sound like a silly question, but I have to ask this because I was doing a one-on-one consult with a beginning author the other day, and their impression when they heard the term newsletter swap was, "Oh,
Right.
you give me your email list, and I give you."
Right.
That's not the case, is it?
Right. No. Yes.
No.
It is a very confusing term that people use. Unfortunately, it's the one that stuck.
Right.
But yeah, so a lot of people think, okay, with a newsletter swap, we're going to give each other our lists, and then we'll basically just swap our emails. That would not comply with a bunch of data regulations. Do not do that. What a newsletter swap comes down to is essentially, you've got a mailing list of 1,000 people, let's say. I've got a mailing list of 1,000 people, let's say. we're both sci-fi authors. You've got a newsletter you're going to send out in a week. I've got a newsletter I'm going to send out in 2 weeks. I'll agree to promote you in my newsletter in a couple weeks if you agree to promote my book in your newsletter in a week.
So what you're really
So that's
doing
a
is
swap.
you're cross-promoting each other rather than
Yes.
actually. So you're swapping the back scratching,
Mentions. Yeah.
or the mentions. Is there and I'm asking these leading questions because I have heard some great questions asked of you on other podcasts that I've listened to. Is there an optimum number that I mean, because you can be overwhelmed by choice too, right? If you say, hey, here are 50 books that I love. Or
Right.
What's an optimum number that you've seen authors use in terms of sharing like that?
Yeah, so I would say, the way that StoryOrigin works, so a lot of these newsletter swaps, there are a lot of places to organize them, and there's not much transparency around that. StoryOrigin sort of makes everything pretty transparent in the community so that you can trust, the person that you're going to swap with, having never necessarily like talked to them or, built a relationship with them over a number of or over a period of time. So with StoryOrigin, when you do a newsletter swap with someone, you can see how many clicks that they've gotten on past swaps that they've organized through StoryOrigin.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so when you are thinking about how many swaps do I want to put in my newsletter, you also have to sort of think about, okay, well, I want to make sure that I'm doing a good job in sending a certain number of clicks to each of these people that I'm promoting, because that's part of my reputation on StoryOrigin is that if you swap with me, I'm only going to do, let's say, 3, 4, 5 swaps, and I'm going to send each one of those a decent amount of traffic. If you put 60 newsletter swaps in your newsletter, each one of those is only going to get a small number of clicks, and so you would sort of be hurting your reputation. So you want to make sure that you're really actually trying to cross promote someone and not just take without giving back.
Wow. Okay. So I do have to ask the silly, stupid questions just because I want to make sure people understand how to do this. So I'm a beginning author. I've got a relatively small newsletter, and
Right.
I write. Let's say I write horror for some strange reason. Let's assume the guy with skulls behind him writes horror, and I'm looking to do this. So where I go. Tell me where I go online first of all.
Yeah.
Find StoryOrigin, the URL.
So StoryOriginApp.com.
StoryOriginApp.com. I
Yep.
create an account there.
Yep.
Okay. And then what do I do roughly? Like, what are the steps that I have to do just so I can get started on this?
Yeah, so it really boils down to what your key goals are as an author, what you're looking to get out of things. If
Okay.
you're a relatively new author with a relatively small mailing list, then I would suggest that the first thing that you want to do is upload a reader magnet. What a reader magnet is generally a 10 to 15,000 word short story prequel to your series. Now, there's a lot of reasons that I use that specific thing, but it could be anything. It could also be a 10% preview of a book that you already have out or something of those sorts.
Let's say I have a 10,000 word story that got turned into a novel. So I could go with that. I'm going to use me as an example because I'm the beginner here. So that's what I would do. I would put up my 10,000 word story. Yeah, that's a reader magnet that people can read for free. And then say sign up, and is that like sign up for my newsletter?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. So a reader magnet, when you put that up on StoryOrigin, it'll create a nice, pretty landing page for you.
Okay.
And then when people go to that landing page for your reader magnet, essentially readers can sign up to your mailing list. And as a part of signing up to your mailing list, they will also get a link to download that book through StoryOrigin. StoryOrigin handles all the file delivery and making sure they can get on their Kindle and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Cool.
But so that's the first thing I would recommend that you do, is just uploading that reader magnet. And then sort of step 2 is participating in some cross promotions. So doing a newsletter swap with another author, which you'd be surprised. I've heard so many different stories from authors who have used StoryOrigin that they started out with a very, very, very small mailing list. It's like my aunt, my grandma, and my dog are on it. And then they request newsletter swaps from people that might have 100 or a couple hundred people on their mailing list, and most people are generous enough that they'll agree to promote you even though you're just starting out, because for a lot of other authors, they were in your position not that long ago.
So is that a thing where if I'm just beginning and I have a relatively small newsletter, maybe I have 2 or 3 dogs and 2 or 3 ants on my
Yeah.
list, I'm probably, is there a way for me to go and look for people on StoryOrigin and say, hey, I've got this is my list, this is the kind of stuff I write, here's some samples of my stuff, because I have a magnet that they can check out too. And maybe other writers might say, oh, my writing is similar to theirs, therefore my fans might like his stuff. Even though he doesn't have a lot of people, this could still be, I guess it could be a more advanced writer helping a beginner.
Right.
But I guess, is there a way that I can look for, well, I'll give you an example. When I joined a squash league locally, and so I'm a beginning to intermediate squash player, and then there's the super advanced powerful people. I don't want to waste their time trying to play me.
Yeah.
Although it's always good to play
Yeah.
someone slightly better than you so you can get better. Is there a way for me to find people
Right.
who are slightly above me so I can kind of learn from them and grow?
Yeah. So essentially, when you sign up to StoryOrigin and you go to your author dashboard, there's going to be 2 big buttons. One is going to say find newsletter swaps, and the second one is going to be find group promotions.
Okay.
And if you hit either one of those buttons, let's say we're talking about newsletter swaps again, you hit find newsletter swaps. What you'll do is you'll actually see a list of all the upcoming campaigns that people have scheduled that they said they're going to be sending out.
Okay.
And on that list, you'll see how large their mailing list is, what their open rate is, and what their click rate is. And if they integrate that mailing list, when they post those stats, if they integrate those stats with their email service provider, for example, MailChimp or MailerLite, they'll get a little green verified check mark to say these stats came directly from the email service provider. So like we know that they're legit.
Okay. So it's not I made up numbers and go, yeah, I have 10,000 people on my list. Okay. Okay, that's
Right.
good. And that way
Yeah.
you can tell if somebody is pulling your leg or not, potentially.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
That's cool. Like a verified celebrity on Twitter or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like that. Exactly.
Okay. All right. So that's cool. So those are a couple of the tools that writers can use, which I think are amazing and worth checking out. But the other one I was excited about was audiobooks are new, and people are getting audiobooks, but they're having trouble getting reviews either of audiobooks or print books, I guess, as well. And you have tools for authors in that regard.
Yeah, that's right. So I released this feature not too long ago, but essentially it's a way for you to distribute your audiobook promo codes. So what some authors might know, some might not, is that you generally will get about 100 promo codes from Audible that you can distribute in the US, and then you get codes specific to audible.co.uk as well. And Findaway Voices, if you use them, they have different plans, but you can either get 30 promo codes or 100 promo codes from them. And in the past, distributing these promo codes has been a huge pain for authors because, and we talked about this a little bit before, but you've got an Excel spreadsheet and you've got people sending you emails, and you got to remember which ones did you already send out, and which ones actually ended up getting redeemed, which ones didn't, handling all this stuff. And then to add on top of that, like, okay, I gave these out so that people could get the book for free and then they could leave a review. But then following up with, okay, all of these different emails and codes, who got them and all this kind of stuff can be incredibly time consuming.
Right.
And so StoryOrigin made a simple way. Essentially, you can create a landing page for your audiobook promo codes on StoryOrigin. A reviewer or a listener can request a code from you. Mm-hmm. And when they request that, they say where they're going to leave a review, whether it's Amazon, Goodreads, etc. And if they are going to leave it on a platform that has a reviewer profile for them, for example, Amazon or Goodreads or BookBub, they can leave the link to their reviewer profile as well. So when you are looking at whether or not to approve the reviewer and actually give a code to them, and StoryOrigin actually handles like the email and distribution of the codes and stuff. So when you approve them and give a code to them, you can actually check out their reviewer profile to make sure, okay, do they actually read in my genre? Do they actually leave reviews? All that kind of stuff before you sort of just send a code out.
Wow, that is amazing. So it's a place. Wow, you can verify that people are actually using the reviews the way they're meant to, or
Right.
using the product and actually legitimately are active reviewers, as opposed to people who are just I like to call friggins, who just grab and run without. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and the other thing that StoryOrigin does is, so if someone has requested, let's say, been approved for 10 promo codes through StoryOrigin before, and said they were going to leave reviews on Goodreads for all 10 of those, and they only actually ever sort of complete their review information for that book on StoryOrigin for 2 out of those 10, then they'll have a reviewer rate for Goodreads of 20%. And so you can actually see they've sort of got a reputation on StoryOrigin because they, are submitting links for reviews that they've completed. So you can know, okay, before I approve this person and give a code to them, are they actually going to leave a review?
So that's fantastic. So reviewers are you can actually check to see if they're legitimate authors who are saying if they've got a verified numbers, so their open rate or the value.
Yep.
So you're not guessing all the time. You're actually being able to make some informed decisions on promotions. So what are we missing? What are the other the tools that writers can use? Because I know there's quite a suite of opportunity there.
Yeah. So the thing that we were just talking about with audiobooks, there's a feature for review copies on StoryOrigin as well. So ebooks.
Okay.
And all of those same features that we were talking about, like looking at completion rates, looking at reviewer profiles, all that kind of stuff, that all applies to the ebook side of review copies as well.
Oh, okay, great. And again,
Yeah.
you vetted people who actually leave reviews. So you actually have a reasonable expectation that all this work you put into it might actually result in a review, as opposed to throwing it into the wild and hoping.
Right. And well, this is sort of where it comes down to your personal risk tolerance as an author. StoryOrigin shows you all the requests that you get, and you get to approve each reviewer on a case-by-case basis after vetting their profile and saying, okay, is this someone that I feel comfortable giving a free book or audiobook to?
Oh,
So
okay.
it's not like I'm sitting here and saying, okay, deciding on arbitrary, completion rates or something like this, arbitrary metrics, and saying, okay, all of these people, they're going to be approved for anything that they request, and all of these people, they're not going to be approved. It's totally in your hands as an author on StoryOrigin who you want to approve and sort of what your risk tolerance is.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you've seen since you've launched this that have been sort of interesting to see how authors have used these in successful ways, use some of these tools?
Yeah. So I, when I released that like audiobook, promo code distribution feature and review tracking feature, I did not think it was going to be as quickly adopted as I saw. So had massive adoption very quickly, and people just started using it a ton. So I released the ebooks feature, and the review copy feature for ebooks, and it grew, but it didn't have quite the same spark as the audiobook promo review tracking feature.
Well, potentially,
So
because
that really surprised me.
Yeah, audiobooks are probably are newer, so there's
Right.
probably not as many opportunities. So when an opportunity comes up, authors go, "Oh, check this
Right.
out. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought, okay, there's not as many authors with audiobooks. This feature isn't going to be used as much, but I was completely wrong. So I'm glad I did
Well, that's
it.
fantastic. Are there
Yeah.
any other things that have surprised you since you first started, since you first released the code and made it live for authors to use?
No, I mean, I think I continue to just discover what authors are looking for, what they need, and trying to build features that help them around those different things. There's still a lot of stuff that I think StoryOrigin can do for authors. For example, like one of the things that we didn't talk about, but back in December, I released a feature for authors to do sort of goal tracking. So for books that they're writing or editing, you can set, word count goals, and then StoryOrigin will, you can track your daily progress. StoryOrigin will give you nice graphs and say, okay, this is sort of what word count you need to hit every single day if you want to hit your goal by this date. And so StoryOrigin has, like a feature like that. You're like, oh, why does StoryOrigin have that, right? But it's sort of, StoryOrigin, what I want it to be is sort of your command central as an author for your content planning and calendar and figuring out when things are going out and all that kind of stuff, right? Because a lot of that stuff gets really messy, especially when you're talking about like, also content planning calendars for your newsletter about when you're going to be in group promotions or when you're doing newsletter swaps, all these kinds of things. So yeah, that was a feature that I released. And again, I didn't think was going to anybody was going to be super excited about, but then again, people really loved it. So yeah.
It sounds like it's like just the beginning of this opportunity to control a lot of different things in one dashboard, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And still, I mean, you might be listening to this and think, oh, this sounds like incredibly unwieldy. But the most of the feedback that I get from authors is actually that's generally more user friendly than any of the stuff that just does one of the things that StoryOrigin does.
Right.
So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And the reason it gets, it's user friendly is because, I'm both the developer and the customer support person. So if I'm getting a lot of emails about, hey, this doesn't feel right, I don't understand what's going on here, it's like, oh, I should make this better or easier, faster.
And speaking of which, you have taken the time, I've noticed, to create videos. So I'm a very visual based learner. So going in to set something up, you've got a step-by-step video for practically every single option that you have available right now in StoryOrigin, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So all of the videos are pretty up to date and can sort of figure out how to do everything just from those.
Okay, that's fantastic. So the next question that everyone's probably asking is, okay, this sounds like an amazing tool. What is it, like $1,000 a month? Like how is this what is the cost right now on this?
Yeah, so StoryOrigin is currently in open beta, and
Okay.
open beta in this case does not mean crappy software, as a lot of people might assume.
Yeah.
It's been used by thousands of authors already at this point. Actually, the reason it's in open beta is because I'm trying to figure out what the pricing model is going to be,
Oh, okay.
and I'm coming down to sort of a conclusion on that pretty soon here about, I want to make it really affordable for people because a lot of authors just starting out don't necessarily have the money to spend on something.
Right.
And so I want to make it affordable, but I also want to make sure that it's going to be useful to sort of everyone across the spectrum. So that's what I'm coming down to. And so it's completely free to use all of the features right now. If you sign up during the beta period, you will continue to get it for free, everything for free for a period of time. And this is all stuff that you can read directly on the StoryOrigin website. So
Okay.
I try to be all super transparent about all this kind of stuff. You'll be able to use it for free even after people have to start paying for it when they're signing up after the beta period. For a period of time, so that might be something, several months. So yeah, but right now, sign up now.
So now
Gotta get
is
on it.
we're
Yeah.
early March 2020 when we're recording. In case you're listening to this sometime in the distant future, so where Evan won't talk to me anymore because of this massive company that he's the CEO of. But right now when we're recording this, it's March 2020, and so a writer can sign up and get into the early beta of this for free, and then there will be pricing coming along. So just be aware of that, and you are very transparent about that on the website, saying, okay, we're getting some things in place, we're building it up, and we're going to charge you a reasonable price, and that's coming.
Coming. And the reason that I haven't built the pricing model or done any of that stuff yet is just because the way that I think about sort of products is I just wanted to build the best product possible, right? And I'm continuing to do that. Like even after the beta period ends, that doesn't mean like StoryOrigin's not getting more upgrades. It will continue to grow and become better and better. But I really wanted to just be 100% focused on just having the best sort of platform, making it the most user-friendly thing possible. And I didn't want to have to worry about invoices and all of the other sort of business side of things. So it's really just focused on the product vision and making that come to life.
So it sounds like this has probably consumed a significant amount of your time. Is it safe to say that since you started StoryOrigin, your desire to write stories has not necessarily been matched with the ability to find the time to write short fiction again?
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, when I left my previous role and I started to get back into writing, and then I was starting StoryOrigin at the same time, and then StoryOrigin quickly took over 100% of my time. So, but I would still really love to get back to writing and get write a series someday. So hopefully I'll be able to get there someday.
And when you do, you've got some really great tools that you can leverage
That's right.
to get reviews, to get connections with cross promotions and stuff. Well, Evan, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Let's remind users where they can go and check out more about StoryOrigin.
Yeah, so people can find it at storyoriginApp.com. And if anyone has questions on it, you can, if you just scroll to the bottom of the page, the front page on StoryOrigin, or if you hit the contact form, my email address is completely out there in the open. So feel free to just shoot me an email too.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
There's something that Evan said and talks about related to StoryOrigin that reminds me of a really important element when you're trying to measure or success. And it's kind of like shooting into the dark or actually shooting towards a reasonably lit target. And that's kind of what you have with StoryOrigin. Whether you're looking to do a newsletter swap, and I'm glad we took the time to explain that newsletter swap actually means basically cross-promoting one another in your newsletter rather than sharing your email list, because that is not legal, depending on privacy laws, etc. But looking at the transparency associated with different authors and their mailing lists in terms of being able to use the systems like MailerLite and MailChimp to show what a person's open rate is. So when you're making a decision to partner with someone, when you're making a decision to collaborate and cross-promote, that you actually have a reasonable idea of what the other person is able to bring to the table. And I think that's a hugely valuable thing because it can save you a lot of time and anxiety and worry. Similarly, if you're going to give away codes for people to access your book so they can leave reviews, being able to actually have a reasonable expectation or understanding that the person that you're giving a review to is very likely to actually review the book, as opposed to just take it and cut and run. And And I love whenever writers can have access to tools and resources and systems that actually allow for that sort of visibility, that sort of transparency. And that transparency is something that's also, Evan's being very transparent about StoryOrigin. Yes, it's in free beta right now. So, hey, go ahead, take advantage of it. Test out the tools, try it, see if that can be something that's useful for you. And then he will be, and he's letting people know that he will be charging for it. It's going to be a reasonable price. But he's basically making sure that the tools are useful and valuable to authors first, making sure that there's value that's being given, value that he is creating that is allowing authors the use of the tools. And even, several of the tools he spoke about where he wasn't sure if it was a tool that authors would be able to use, such as the goal tracking. But there are authors that are using it, which is great. It's yet another tool that they can use. And that kind of leads to the sort of last reflection on that. And it's very much what Evan's doing right now is he's invested a lot of time, personal time and energy and resources to creating these tools to allow writers to use them for free. He's doing the giving. And this is just maybe in parallel with the kind of thing that you do in content marketing or in your newsletter to your readers. It's a lot of giving, a lot of sharing, and then the ask comes as a very small percentage or a very small portion of what's going on. At the end of the day, there can be a whole bunch of writers that really get an opportunity to try this out, to see if it works for them. And then if they find that it works, then it's something that they know that they're willing to invest money in. And I love that parallel in the giving and the asking element. And that's always great to see people in our industry that are willing to do that sharing, willing to do that giving, and the ask is very, very small. Well, those are just some of the reflections that I have of this interview. The other thing is I had created a StoryOrigin account, and I've only just started to play around with it. But then after chatting with Evan, I want to go in and really, really play with it a little bit more and get a little bit more detailed about the ways that I can leverage it as an author. If you've used StoryOrigin, I'd love to hear from you on ways that you have used it, strategies or tactics that you've used. Please share them in the notes over at starkreflections.ca for episode 122. But that is the end of this episode. Again, this is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. This has been episode 122. Very, very likely next week in episode 123, I'm going to have an interview with Jay Thorne and Zach Bohannon talking about their new book, the 3-story structure, and I'm pretty excited about that conversation because I've been listening to it. I'm going to start to read the book, which I believe is being released today on Thursday, March 5th, and then that way I can have started to read it before I interview them early next week for next week's podcast. So, if you enjoy this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review of the podcast on the podcatcher of your choice, or better yet, share this podcast with someone that you think would get value from it. Again, this is Mark. Thanks so much for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. So until next week and episode 123, here's wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.